Imagine a German supply train moving through occupied France. Inside are thousands of pounds of coal, sacks of grain, and military supplies desperately needed by the German war machine. The guards check everything. The paperwork is perfect. The cargo looks completely normal. Nothing seems wrong. But hidden among the supplies is something that should be harmless. A simple white powder. Something that looks like ordinary flour. Something a baker could use to make bread. Something that could pass through enemy checkpoints without raising a single alarm. But hours later, deep inside the locomotive, that flour turns into a devastating explosion. The train jumps off the tracks. The engine is torn apart. Vital supplies disappear in seconds, and the Germans are left with one terrifying question. How did ordinary flour become a weapon? Because this wasn't flour. This was one of the strangest sabotage weapons ever created in World War II. A weapon so simple that it looked almost ridiculous. A weapon so clever that enemy soldiers could inspect it, touch it, and still miss the danger. The Allies called it Aunt Jemima. And no, this wasn't a joke. This was a secret explosive designed to bring down the Nazi supply network from the inside. Welcome to Allied Sabotage Vault. We've already uncovered some of the strangest weapons of World War II: exploding rats, pencil detonators, the Welrod assassination pistol, sticky bombs, coal torpedoes, even giant rocket-powered wheels designed to attack enemy defenses. But Aunt Jemima was different, because this weapon didn't look like a weapon. It looked like food. And that was the entire point, because during war, the most powerful weapon isn't always the biggest bomb. Sometimes, it's the thing nobody notices. In 1942, the Allies were facing a massive problem. Germany controlled huge areas of Europe. Their armies depended on an enormous supply network. Trains carried fuel, trains carried ammunition, trains carried food, trains carried replacement parts and weapons. Without those trains, the German military machine would slow down. But attacking them directly was extremely difficult. A bomber could destroy a railway. But it required aircraft. It required planning. And it often caused massive destruction in areas the Allies didn't want to hit. Special operations teams needed something different, something smaller, something that could disappear into the enemy's world. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, was searching for exactly that. The OSS was America's wartime intelligence agency. It sent agents behind enemy lines. It trained resistance fighters. And it developed some of the strangest weapons of the entire conflict. Their mission was simple: find a way to sabotage the enemy without looking like sabotage. And their scientists came up with an idea that sounded impossible. What if an explosive could hide in plain sight? What if a weapon could pass inspection because everyone believed it was harmless? That's when the idea of Aunt Jemima was born. The concept was brilliant. Instead of creating something that looked dangerous, they created something that looked ordinary. The explosive mixture was designed to resemble flour. The color was right. The texture was right. The appearance was right. To anyone looking at it, it was just another sack of baking supplies. But inside was something far more destructive. The Allies created a disguised explosive material that could be transported like normal goods. A resistance fighter carrying a suspicious metal device would immediately attract attention. A person carrying sacks of flour? Almost nobody cared. That was the genius. The weapon didn't defeat security. It convinced security that there was nothing to find. Imagine being a German checkpoint officer in occupied Europe. You search vehicles, you inspect documents, you look for weapons, you look for ammunition, you look for anything unusual. But a bag of flour, that doesn't seem dangerous. That seems like food. And food was everywhere. That's why the disguise was so powerful. The weapon wasn't hidden underground. It wasn't buried. It wasn't smuggled in a secret container. It was sitting in the open, and nobody suspected it. Now comes the dangerous part. How was it used? Resistance fighters and Allied agents found ways to place the disguised explosive near critical targets. Railways became one of the biggest targets, because a destroyed train wasn't just a destroyed train. It could mean thousands of soldiers without supplies. A missing shipment of fuel could stop vehicles. A destroyed locomotive could block an entire railway line. A single act of sabotage could create chaos far beyond the original explosion. And that was exactly what the Allies wanted. Not just destruction, disruption. The most terrifying part was the psychological effect. Once the Germans realized that something like this existed, they had a problem. Because how do you defend against something that looks completely normal? A bomb can be searched for. A hidden weapon can sometimes be detected. But a fake food supply? That creates paranoia. Suddenly, every shipment became suspicious. Every sack became questionable. Every supply route required more inspection. The Germans were forced to spend time checking things that previously required no attention. And in war, time is a weapon. Every minute wasted inspecting supplies was a minute not spent fighting. But here's where the story gets even stranger. The name Aunt Jemima itself came from the famous American pancake flour brand. The nickname was almost absurd. A deadly weapon carrying the name of a breakfast product. That contrast was exactly what made it memorable. The Allies understood something important. The best disguise is sometimes the most ordinary thing possible. A spy carrying a weapon looks like a spy. A soldier carrying explosives looks like a soldier. But a sack of flour? Nobody expects a sack of flour to destroy a train. And this wasn't only used in Europe. The Allies also looked for ways to use disguised explosives against Japanese forces in Asia. Different environments, different targets. Same idea. Make the enemy believe everything is normal. Then strike when they least expect it. But was Aunt Jemima really one of the weapons that changed the war? That answer is complicated. It wasn't a single weapon that won World War II. Wars are decided by millions of soldiers, factories, resources, strategies, and mistakes. But weapons like this created something extremely valuable: uncertainty. They forced the enemy to question their own systems. And sometimes, that is just as powerful as destruction. Think about what made Aunt Jemima terrifying. It wasn't the size of the explosion. It wasn't a massive machine. It wasn't a giant bomb dropped from the sky. It was the idea. The idea that something completely harmless could suddenly become deadly. A sack of flour, a normal shipment, a routine delivery, all transformed into a weapon. That's what made it dangerous. Today, most people remember the famous tanks, aircraft, and battles of World War II. They remember giant weapons, massive armies, huge victories. But hidden in the shadows were smaller inventions like Aunt Jemima, weapons built not with overwhelming force, but with deception. And sometimes deception is the most powerful weapon of all. Because the enemy can fight what they can see, but they cannot fight what they never realize exists. The Germans built enormous factories. They built advanced aircraft. They created terrifying machines of war. But somewhere in the shadows, the Allies were fighting back with something that looked like it belonged in a kitchen. A simple white powder, a harmless-looking supply. A weapon that proved one unbelievable lesson. In war, the deadliest thing may not look dangerous at all. And that is why the story of Aunt Jemima remains one of the strangest, most forgotten sabotage weapons of World War II.